If your practice is losing money on claims, I bet the leak doesn't start in billing. It starts at your front desk. I spent my career in revenue cycle management, and one pattern shows up in almost every multi specialty group I walk into. Claims get denied weeks later for problems that took 30 seconds to create at the front desk. And today I want to talk about what I call the multi specialty intake trap and why your verification of benefits process is probably squeezing your margins right now. So, on paper, verification of benefits sounds simple. You call the insurance company, you confirm the patient's covered, you note the copay and deductible, and you move on with your day. And in a single specialty primary care practice, that flow usually works just fine. But in a multi specialty group, it falls apart, and here's why. A patient comes in for what looks like a routine visit. The front desk team verifies the basic plan, confirms the coverage, they note the copay. But what they don't catch is that this particular specialty, say surgical orthopedics, cardiology with imaging, has separate pre authorization requirements, or that the plan has a sub network rule that excludes your facility, or the patient's coverage actually changed at the start of the month and the system you're checking against hasn't updated yet. Now, multiply that by hundreds of patients' visits a week. Most of them will be fine, but the ones that weren't fine, you won't know for many weeks, sometimes more than a month. The claim gets submitted, it gets denied, it comes back to your billing team, who now has to chase a problem that was created months ago. Sometimes you recover the payment and sometimes they don't. And the patient who didn't know any of this gets a surprise bill in the mail that they cannot pay. Then they call your office, and now you have a service problem on top of a revenue problem. And here's why this matters more than it looks. The financial impact of intake errors isn't just the dollar on the denied claim, it's the cost of working the claim again. Every denial that comes back to your billing team takes time to research, correct, and resubmit. And even a relatively small share of intake driven denials translates into dozens of claims a month your billing team is reworking instead of doing higher value collection work. Across the year, the rework costs up to a number that's hard to ignore. And that's because you count the claims you ultimately write off or the patient receivables that age out. And then there's the silent cost, the one that's even harder to see. It's the cash flow drag. Every claim that gets stuck in a denial cycle delays your collection by weeks. Across a year, that adds up to real working capital pressure on the practice. So, when I talk about the multi specialty intake trap, what I'm really pointing at is this: the front desk is doing what looks like the right job. The breakdown is between a simple verification flow and the complex coverage reality that multi specialty practices usually deal with every day. So let's talk about what an intake process that actually catches these problems look like, because the answer isn't to replace your front desk with software. Your patient facing team should stay patient facing. The answer is to add a layer of trained eyes behind them, working the same patient before the claim ever goes out the door. And here's the principle: a general front desk team can reliably verify the simple, low complexity cases, primary care visits, routine follow ups, single payer relationships they see every week. What they can't realistically do is keep current on every payer's specialty specific rules, every plan's sub-network exclusions, every prior auth requirement that varies by procedure code. That's not a training problem. There's just too much surface area and it changes too often. So the work has to be split. Routine verification stays at the front desk where it belongs, or you have an automated tool that batch checks all the eligibility the day before. Specialty specific eligibility and prior auth verifications need to go to people who do it all day, people who have seen the same payer denial patterns hundreds of times, who know which plan requires a separate imaging auth versus which bundles into the visit auth, and who can recognize a stale coverage record before the patient is seen. If you're building this in-house, here's what you actually need: a dedicated verification role, not the front desk role, specialty specific payer reference materials kept current quarterly at a minimum, a documented escalation path when something doesn't look right, and critically, a feedback loop from denials back to intake. Every denial that traces back to an intake error should be reviewed by the verification team within a week while the pattern is still fresh. The single biggest leverage point is timing. The moment a verification problem becomes a denial, you're weeks behind. The moment you catch it at intake, when the patient is still in the office and you can call them about the coverage gap or call the payer for an updated authorization, the problem's fixed in minutes. The whole architecture has to be built around closing that 30-second window before it becomes a 6-week denial cycle. Whether you build this layer in-house or contract for it doesn't change the principle. What matters is that someone with specialty-specific payer expertise is putting eyes on the verification before the claim goes out and not after. So let me walk you through how this pattern typically plays out because it shows up again and again in many practices. Picture a group with several specialty lines under one roof: orthopedics, physical therapy, cardio, derm, and others. The front desk has a verification flow that works fine for the simple, single pay or low complexity visits. The trap shows up in the visits the standard flow wasn't built for. A patient comes in for a specialty consult. The front desk team verifies the basic plan and notes the copay. What they don't catch is that this particular specialty has a separate pre-auth requirement under the patient's plan, or the patient's coverage changed at the start of the month and the system hasn't updated yet. The patient is seen, the claim goes out, and weeks later, the denial comes back. Now the billing team is chasing a problem that was created a month ago. The patient has no idea any of this was happening, gets a surprise bill in the mail, calls the office, and now the service problem on top of the revenue problem. Multiply that across a few visits a week, and the impact compounds quickly. Practices that step out of this trap don't tear down their front desk. They put trained eyes behind intake, verification specialists who handle the specialty and payer specific complexity, and the local team can't realistically keep current on, supported by analytical tools that surface flags at the right moment. The work happens before the claim goes out the door and not after the denial comes back. That's the multi-specialty intake trap. The fix isn't at the back end, it's at the front end. If you're a multi-specialty practice and you're not sure whether you have this problem, here's the gut check I'd run. Pull your last 3 months of denials, sort them by reason code. If a meaningful share are eligibility related, prior auth related, or coverage related, that's the multi-specialty intake trap showing up in your data. That's the revenue you don't have to lose. From there, the next move is the same whether you handle it in-house or bring in a specialist to help. Look at where in the current workflow that catch is supposed to happen and ask whether the person doing it has both the time and the specialty specific knowledge to actually do it well. If the answer is no, and at most multi-specialty practices, it is a no, that's where the architecture needs to change. Thanks for listening. I'm Chanie Gluck, founder of 4D Global. Stop the leak before the claim goes out the door.